So what does the landscape of the heavyweight division look like now after that last crescendo card on the weekend, in which we saw Agit Kabayel stop Zhilei Zhang and Joseph Parker stop Martin Bakole? What do those results mean in terms of who is most deserving to fight for the world heavyweight title next? Of course, Joseph Parker was supposed to fight for Daniel Dubois' IBF world heavyweight title, but Dubois just happened to get sick a couple of days out, whatever happened there. So then Parker fought Bakole in what was Parker's third massive win in a row, but with obvious question marks around that result that we'll get into. The reason I'm going to focus this video here mainly on the heavyweight title scene is because last month I did a video called Who is most likely to defeat Alexander Usyk, and I did not necessarily give a straight answer to that question in that video, but I previewed the two heavyweight fights on the last crescendo card by saying that the results and the performances we see in those fights will play a big part in who the frontrunner to beat Usyk really is. But that was of course when Dubois was scheduled to fight Parker, but after Dubois pulled out, that really muddied things up in terms of who really should get the Usyk fight next, and it voided my ultimatum of allowing that night of boxing to determine who has the best chance of defeating the number one man of the division. But before we look at all of that, let me quickly run through the big night of boxing that was. And just a pre-warning here, I am going to regurgitate a lot of what I said in those community posts that I did in immediate reaction to each of those fights on the night. So for the 3 or 4 of you that actually do look at my community posts, you can skip past my rundown of the card here. So things really did start out with a bang with that Callum Smith versus Joshua Buatsi fight. They probably set the bar a bit too high in terms of entertainment value, to be quite honest. And it was a big win for Callum Smith, coming in as the underdog and getting the unanimous decision victory after 12 rounds. But yeah, it was just a great back and forth fight from the start to the end. I don't think there was a boring round in there. Each round was nice and competitive and both men showed a lot of grit. Callum Smith definitely had more moments in there in terms of hurting Buatsi, so he of course deserved the win. And I've always rated Callum Smith as a big puncher and good inside fighter, but Buatsi showed a lot of heart to withstand punishment in there and was throwing heat back at Smith. So yeah, again, the card started out with a bang. I've never personally been too interested in Buatsi's career just because I've never been high on his chances against the champions in that 175-pound division. But at the end of the day, that's 2 really fun fights in a row on Riyadh season cards that Buatsi has been involved with. That Willie Hutchinson fight last time out was easily the best fight on that AJ Dubois undercard. Now Buatsi of course lost his O and his WBO interim title in that loss to Callum Smith, but again, I don't see Buatsi going on to do anything against Dimitry, Bivol or Beterbiev or anything like that anytime soon anyway. So let's just hope he's in another fun one next. Surely that Anthony Yarde fight finally, if Yarde indeed gets past Lyndon Arthur in their trilogy fight in April. And as for the scorecards, again, Callum Mundo is the right man to have his hand raised, so let me not cry about a gap on one of the cards. But 119-110 was crazy. Before Callum Smith's big moment in round 6, you surely give a couple of the early rounds to Buatsi. He was getting some good work in and marking up the face of Smith. And even if Buatsi looked gassed out from the 6th round onwards, he still had some moments himself in the second half of the fight. So 117-111 is probably the widest it should be to Smith in that one, but even that's a bit wide. And Callum Smith himself even admitted that 119-110 was harsh on Buatsi. But yeah, forget about all that though. Fair play to Callum Smith. I've enjoyed watching him fight for years now and this one topped it. Great performance in what was a fight of the year contender. But I'll get into title shot implications for Smith when we get to the main event in a bit, because that obviously involves the division he's in. Now, I said that Smith vs Buatsi probably set the bar too high in terms of entertainment value, but that Zhilei Zhang vs Agit Kabayel fight really kept the pace up of the card, didn't it? Zhang was looking dangerous in the first round, but Kabayel's higher output and persistent body punching seemed to be the telling factor as it went on. But in round 5, boom, Chinese power did it, put Kabayel down with that big powerful left hand. But Kabayel is that guy, man. He recovered and got right back to work, peppering Zhang with combos to the body again, and Zhang was starting to look tired in there. Then in round 6, Kabayel does it again, man. He hones in on the body to gain 2 knockdowns and ultimately the stoppage victory. Round 6 KO win for Kabayel, recovering from a knockdown and becoming the first man to stop Zhilei Zhang. That's 3 massive wins in a row for Kabayel on these Riyadh season shows, and they all came against dangerous opponents, and he smoked all of them with body shots. Kabayel has been high in the heavyweight rankings for years, but he never really had any big fights apart from that Chisora fight in Monaco way back in 2017. But now people are starting to see how good Kabayel really is, coming out on top of these 50-50 Riyadh season matchups. He was actually the underdog going into both the Arslanbek-Makhmudov fight and the Frank Sanchez fight, and now people are calling his win over Zhilei Zhang as an upset win as well. But nah, the bookmakers saw what Kabayel was about in those last 2 fights, so he was actually the favourite going into this Zhang fight. But massive win nonetheless. He's still undefeated and he's the new WBC interim heavyweight champion of the world. And we'll of course go into more detail about Agit Kabayel after running down the card. Next up on the card was the Israil Madrimov vs Vergil Ortiz fight. This was probably the least entertaining fight on the card for me personally, or least interesting one to watch live. You could argue that this was a better fight than the Adames vs Sheeraz fight, but I had more of a reason to be interested in that Adames fight for reasons I will reveal shortly. So Vergil Ortiz got the unanimous decision win in that one. I don't have too much to say on this fight. Competitive fight in there, but it wasn't the best performance from Madrimov. We're hearing how that's because he was ill coming into it, but I don't know, man. But yeah, fair play to Ortiz. Put enough pressure on to land some good power shots here and there for the decision win. So after that result, Vergil Ortiz is now still the WBC interim champ at 154. And the full WBC champ of that weight category is Sebastian Fundora. Well, Fundora is the unified WBC and WBO champ, so it could be a unified title shot for Vergil Ortiz next. Fundora does have a fight scheduled in March, but it's a fight he's very much expected to win, so yeah, it could be Ortiz versus Fundora next. As for Madrimov now, look, a pro record of 10-2 with one draw is not pretty, and I know it is back-to-back losses in close fights against top fighters, but I do think his status could plummet a bit here, and the illness excuses might not help in the fans' eyes. It's the same reason he pulled out of that Serhiy Bohachuk fight in December, so this illness stuff is either true or Madrimov is just completely running with lies here. And as for Bohachuk, the man who Vergil Ortiz won that very WBC interim strap from in that controversial fight, some would say that he deserves a title shot next, and he probably does, but I personally want to see that Madrimov versus Bohachuk fight next after everything that's happened in the last couple months. So yeah, Madrimov versus Ortiz. It didn't pick up from the Buatsi Smith fight and the Zhang Kabayel fight. But next up we had the absolute robbery, which was Carlos Adames versus Hamza Sheeraz. Now, at least Adames kept his WBC middleweight title here because the fight was ruled a draw, but the bias and corruption here for Adames to not get the win was so blatant. Sheeraz was the betting favourite and clearly the A-side in every sense here, but his resume coming into the fight did not suggest at all that he was ready for world level, and Adames came in as the reigning and defending champ. So the hype behind Sheeraz coming into this fight was very overboard, but I suppose he is Turki Al-Sheikh's boy. Now look, I don't want to make this video about my gambling woes, but I did really back Carlos Adames to outbox Hamza Sheeraz, and I did put decent money on Adames by points on a single, which would have given me a big return if the right decision was given. Now, I lost a bunch of other bets before this, but Adames' points wouldn't have only broken me even, it actually would have put me in pretty decent profit. You see me, I can take my losses when it comes to gambling, all day, and I won't complain about another single penny that I lost that night. But losing money on a boxing robbery, it's something else, man, I'm telling you. Especially that before the fight, most people were picking Sheeraz to win, whether by points or by KO, but they were saying that Adames might have a little chance to win by knockout. But I studied tape before the fight and actually came to the conclusion that Adames would outbox Sheeraz over 12 rounds. And yes, I know boxing odds are conducive to potential robberies, which is why A-sides are always such heavy favourites, even if they're not that much better than their B-side opponents. So I know that if the B-side looks like he runs 7 rounds to 5, or even 8 rounds to 4, he may very well not get the nod on the cards. But I still backed him because I thought he would completely shut Sheeraz out. And was I wrong? I had 119-109 Adames on my card watching it live. Look, I'm not even going to run the fight down, I'll be honest. You could say Adames didn't do enough himself to make the fight exciting or whatever. His last fight was obviously a boring one as well. But at the end of the day, he won that fight against Sheeraz, man. I'm not going to go on about this too much more, but I mentioned earlier that I was reacting to all of this at the time on my community posts, so if you want the full-length gambling degeneracy-induced rant on this decision, then do go read those community posts. So yeah, the card fell off a bit after the first 2 fights, but after that we had the Shakur Stevenson vs Josh Padley fight, a fight in which Shakur got the round 9 TKO win. Josh Padley was one of those 2 fighters on the card along with Martin Bakole, who took the fight on insanely short notice, 4 or 5 days I think for Padley. Of course, Shakur was originally meant to fight Floyd Schofield, a fight in which I was really interested in for a certain reason that I expressed on my community posts, and I went a bit mental on there after the fight's cancellation. But yeah, we got Josh Padley instead. Now it was a cool story of Padley getting the call on fight week while he was at work installing solar panels and that. And on fight night, he did give a decent showing of himself, all things considered. And in regards to whether or not this fight between Shakur and Josh Padley was a good fight, I know those involved with the promotion of the fight were making out like it could be good, obviously because they are promoting it, but realistically, none of us expected anything out of this fight, either an easy and early win for Shakur or a boring 12-round shutout. But considering the pragmatic expectations of the fight, this was a half decent fight, I'll say. Now, it was hard to give Josh Padley a round in there, but it probably was more competitive than expected early on. Then the fight started livening up a bit in the 5th round, and then round 6 the crowd really got into it. But this is the round that Shakur really started to hone in on the body, and he kept this onslaught up until round 9. The round that he knocked Josh Padley down 3 times with body shots, which ultimately urged Padley's corner to pull him out of the fight. Shakur Stevenson was still the WBC lightweight champion of the world. Now, Shakur doesn't need to go up in anyone's estimations after a win like that. He was a 1-33 favourite on the odds, and even that was probably a bargain. Padley is not world level like that, and he only took the fight on a few days' notice. But not to excuse him too much, Shakur could only beat the man in front of him. But as for Shakur Stevenson's hands, they're cooked, man. Those brittle and frail hands of his. You can see that his hands were hurting him badly in there. It's probably why he was focusing on throwing most of his big power shots to the body. It's a softer target, of course, and I'm sure he'll be glad that he could get the body shot stoppage win there. Because I've spoken on this channel before about how he tried to get the body shot stoppage win in his last fight against Artur and failed to do so. But yeah, let me not make out like this was a big win for Shakur, and I don't see him doing what he did to Padley to most other guys up the lightweight rankings realistically. But with Kabayel's win over Zhang as well, it was fun to see 2 body shot stoppages on the night. But before I move on, I must mention that Shakur Stevenson vs Tank Davis is surely up next after this, providing Tank gets past Lamont Roach, which I'm sure we all believe he will. Shakur vs Tank is the WBC-WBA unification fight at lightweight, so it's got to be made. Now in the past, I've never been the biggest Shakur fan. I would have picked Tank to beat him, and I would have wanted Tank to beat him as well. But now, I don't know if I can say the same. I might root for Shakur if the fight with Tank does get made. Because this whole thing with Tank being a diva has really gone to a new level, with him acting like a kid when everyone else was at that Ring magazine event and he wasn't. And I don't just want to copy what Eddie Hearn has been saying here and go on some Riyadh Season ambassador narrative, but Riyadh Season is where the best are fighting the best in real 50-50 fights. So for Tank to rebel against that so hard just reinforces that notion that Tank is only in it for them pick'em fights. And again, I know Shakur only just beat Josh Padley and he's getting clowned for fighting an electrician who took the fight on short notice, and the original scheduled fight with Floyd Schofield was to be a massive mismatch on the odds anyway. But as far as I see it, not to get into some petty fanboy business here, but I do think Floyd Schofield was to be a way lighter opponent than Lamont Roach will be for Tank. I mean, that's what the odds suggested at first, but Floyd Schofield moved to a way bigger underdog when that fight got closer. The bookies must have known something there, but let me not get into any conspiracy theories here. So yeah, regardless of Shakur not having a big 50 fight on a Riyadh Season card yet, the fact alone that Shakur is in the Riyadh Season mix means that I'm Shakur over Tank right now. And trust me, as much as I wish I was, I ain't getting paid to say that. Look at how small my channel is, mate. But me saying all that is nothing against the PBC, by the way, just Tank Davis fights in particular, because the undercard of Tank Davis vs Lamont Roach is pretty stacked. PBC are stepping their game up to compete with Riyadh Season, and this could only be good for the sport. Next up was Joseph Parker vs Martin Bakole. So when Floyd Schofield pulled out due to illness on fight week and Padley took the fight on short notice, it was a real underdog story. But when Dubois pulled out due to illness on fight week and Bakole flew over from Congo and got to Riyadh the night before the fight, he stole all of Josh Padley's thunder. But he didn't put as much of a fight up as Josh Padley did in the ring. Now, we're not going to get into Daniel Dubois yet, but we will get into the man who wore his gloves on the night. So yes, Martin Bakole was knocked out by Joseph Parker in round 2. He was competitive until the point of the knockout, but that grazing right hand to the temple from Parker really just threw off Bakole's equilibrium and sent him down in almost comedic fashion, I hate to say. Now Parker was the favourite in there, and people did expect him to win, but they didn't expect a round 2 knockout. So yeah, that's a big win for Joseph Parker. And many people do also excuse the loss from Bakole's part due to how late notice it was, with Bakole having no training camp, being on no sleep and being jet lagged, which is fair enough. Now look, personally, I would have picked Parker to beat Bakole anyway, regardless of how prepared Bakole was. And if you did see my who is most likely to defeat Alexander Usyk video, then you know that I don't rate Bakole as highly as most other people do. But because of that hype around him, that is still a big win for Parker. I also won't use this defeat as a chance to say Martin Bakole was just a hype job, due to the circumstances around the fight. So I'll say fair play to Bakole for taking the fight on short notice, but I'll say fair play to Joseph Parker more so, I'll be honest, because Parker was due for a world title fight and a much deserved shot at the belt, and got deprived of this opportunity just 2 days before the fact because the champion he was due to be challenging couldn't make it to the fight. So Parker then probably could have dropped out of the fight as well, leaving this heavyweight co-main event completely cancelled to hold out for a rescheduled date to fight Dubois for the belt, the man he had been preparing for. But instead, upon the announcement of Dubois' illness on the Thursday, Parker expressed his willingness to take on any step-in opponent in a non-world title fight, or a defence of his WBO interim strap. And believe me, Parker would have fought any man that stepped up, and it ended up being none other than the proverbial super avoided boogeyman of the division, a compromised version of that man, but still a dangerous fight on paper. As for Bakole, he showed balls to do what he did. I'm sure he had an absolutely mental 48 hours dragging his way over to Saudi and putting his health on the line by stepping in the ring in such a compromised state. But at the same time, he has an IBF eliminator lined up against FA at Jaguar for May, and as far as we know right now, that fight is still scheduled to take place. So the guy flew to Saudi, boxed for a round and a half, and got the biggest payday of his life by a good bit, I'm hearing, which is why he looked so happy after the fight and was going around all jolly. And he still has the title eliminator lined up as far as we know. And although Bakole got stopped in there, he definitely didn't take enough accumulative damage or anything to rule him out of that very winnable Jaguar fight in May. So fair play to Bakole for rolling the dice. He deserves the props he is getting for doing so, but obviously Parker took the bigger W all round for taking this fight. But before we go into what that win means or should mean for Parker, let's finally look at the main event of that card. So yeah, Dimitry Bivol won by a majority decision in the big undisputed light heavyweight title fight rematch in a classic affair. This was a nice back and forth fight, similar to their first fight in terms of their ebbs and flows, both men having their moments but each round being so close, and this time around it was probably more entertaining. Their two fights against each other haven't been barn burners with either of them getting rocked or knocked down or anything, but because they are so evenly matched, they need to be really meticulous and selective in how they pick their shots, making it a tough fight for both men, and a really good watch even for the casual fans, as again, although Bivol and Beterbiev didn't have crazy wars, it's very intriguing to try and determine who's winning each round and who is in control of the fight. So as for the judges, one judge had it 114 to 114, an even card, and the other two had it 115 to 113 to Bivol and 116-112 to Bivol. Now, personally, I had it 115 to 113 to Bivol, and here's exactly how I scored it round for round as you can see on screen. So you can see that I gave Bivol the first 3 rounds, then gave Beterbiev the next 3 after that. And you know the narrative coming out of the first fight was that Bivol let it slip in the championship rounds and was disengaging and letting Beterbiev take the fight. Well, this time around, I was thinking that Bivol only had 3 solid rounds in him and he was going to let the whole rest of the fight go away from him. But in the second half of the fight, Bivol stepped things up nicely. Beterbiev was still dangerous with his pressure, landing big shots here and there, but Bivol dominated the exchanges for most of the second half of the fight, setting his feet at the right time and letting off unanswered 3-4 punch combos on Beterbiev. So this time around, yes, Bivol was the clear winner. And I know I only had it 115 to 113 to Bivol, but I did have him 6-3 up after 9 and 7-4 up after 11. So it's 1 apiece after this fight. So does that warrant a trilogy? Well, some people would say no on the basis that it could get boring a third time and hold up the division. And some would say no on the basis that they believe Bivol was robbed the first time around, so this verdict was just right in the wrong, so to speak. But me personally, I had Beterbiev winning the first fight 116-112 in fact, so I do see it as 1 apiece. And I had a very good experience watching the first 2 fights, so I'm down for the third. But before going on too much about the potential trilogy, we do have to give props to Bivol, man. I do think that he did fade in the late rounds of that first fight, but this time he made the right adjustments and paced himself to have a strong end to the fight, and this is just a massive win for the guy, all things considered. I am indeed happy for the guy. So as for the trilogy, the first 2 fights did have their similarities, but a lot of people loved it both times around, the way that the 2 men's styles meshed. So we can either get another closely contested high-level spectacle again, which I'm sure will garner straight interest, or something completely different from the first 2 fights could happen, which would ultimately shock the world. And as for holding the division up, look, the first fight had the perfect selling point. 2 undefeated guys unifying all the belts and the lineage in an undisputed fight, and it was so close that it warranted a rematch. But we know what tends to happen with undisputed title fight rematches. One of the belts tend to get stripped from the champion between the first fight and the rematch, usually the IBF belt, meaning that the loser of the first fight, who is in turn the challenger of the rematch, will be deprived of the chance to fight for the undisputed title. But this time around, the right thing happened. The 2 men had an immediate rematch within 4.5 months of their first outing, meaning that the rematch was indeed for undisputed gold. So thankfully, Bivol did get to win the undisputed title in his emphatic victory in the rematch. So yes, both men became undisputed champs as a result of the duology. So the trilogy doesn't really need to be for undisputed. Bivol could get stripped of 1 or 2 of the belts if he is to fight Beterbiev again next to settle the score. Therefore, a vacated belt could be contested for in the meantime while the trilogy happens. Then the winner of the trilogy could fight whoever gains a vacant strap in another undisputed fight. As for the options there, Callum Smith is the WBO interim champ at light heavyweight right now, and David Benavidez is the interim WBC and the regular WBA champ. So one of them would fight the #1 ranked guy in the governing body that they hold the interim belt of in a vacant title fight. But to be honest, none of those fights up the ranks interest me for either of those guys. Personally, I would rather just see Callum Smith and David Benavidez fight each other for either one of the vacant WBO, WBC and WBA titles, if that fight could indeed get made. Then the winner of that fight could fight the winner of Bivol Beterbiev 3. But realistically, Bivol would keep all 3 of those belts going into the Beterbiev trilogy, and he'll just get stripped of the IBF title, and then the IBF would have 2 randoms fight for the vacant world title. I shouldn't need to explain why that would be the most likely outcome. I'm sure most of my viewers know how that goes. So yeah, that was my brief rundown of the card and brief rundown of the light heavyweight title scene just there. But before I move on, I shall recognise that Beterbiev is 40 years old. So if the trilogy didn't happen because Beterbiev retires, then that's fine by me. We'll probably get Bivol vs Benavidez next, which I'm sure we're all down for. But Beterbiev has expressed his desire to do the trilogy fight and settle the score, so it's more likely that he retires after the trilogy, win or lose. So if Beterbiev won the trilogy then retired, then the light heavyweight title picture will really get shaken up. So now it's time to take a look at the heavyweight title shot implications of the results of those 2 heavyweight fights on the card, and who looks to have the best chance of defeating the unified heavyweight champion of the world, the #1 man that looks absolutely unbeatable in Alexander Usyk. So before we get into who's most deserving to get a shot at Usyk, let's take a look at who has the best chance at beating him. As much as I would love to just replay clips of what I was saying in my who is most likely to defeat Alexander Usyk video, then pick it up from there, putting all the clips in from what I was saying in that video would bulk out this one way too much. So let me try and condense that information as much as I can for you guys here. But I'll leave a link to that video in the top of the description for those of you who are interested in my full length explanation. And don't worry, that video isn't void now after the 2 fights that I've just concluded. A lot of what I'm saying in that video is irrespective of those fights. Alright, so basically, at the end of that video, I did my order of who was most likely to be able to defeat Alexander Usyk at that specific point in time, and I actually put Agit Kabayel at the top of the list, but I still said that he probably doesn't even have a 40% chance against Usyk, and for everyone else below him, it was slim pickings. So pretty much, in that video, I just glazed Usyk and said that I don't think anyone beats him unless he fights on for too long, but Usyk probably only has 2 fights left, and I didn't pick anyone to beat him within his next 2 fights. But I did say that my order of who is most likely to beat him could change based off of those results of the Zhang vs Kabayel fight and the Dubois vs Parker fight. To start with Kabayel vs Zhang, I basically said that a win over Kabayel for Zhang or a win over Zhang for Kabayel wouldn't do too much for either man's chances against Usyk, as neither man compares to Usyk and everything is a different story against Usyk. So for Zhilei Zhang, I just gave him a puncher's chance against Usyk, but it's a big puncher's chance with how dangerous Zhang has proved to be. And if he were to knock out the undefeated Kabayel in impressive fashion, his chances of being able to defeat Usyk would go up a bit. And as for Kabayel, I was gassing him up as the best body puncher at heavyweight as a result of his body shot stoppage wins over 2 dangerous undefeated guys in Arslanbek Makhmudov and Frank Sanchez. But I also noted that those 2 fights do have to be taken with somewhat of a pinch of salt when it comes to Kabayel's chances against Usyk, because being able to set up body shots on Alexander Usyk is just such a different story to being able to set them up on Makhmudov and Sanchez, of course. And as for Kabayel defeating Zhilei Zhang, the same thing would apply. Landing body shots on him doesn't do much for his chances of landing them on Usyk, due to Usyk's foot speed and all that. But I did say that stopping a guy the size of Zhilei Zhang to the body would further solidify Kabayel as the best body puncher at heavyweight, and it is said that Usyk is vulnerable to the body, so a body shot KO win over Zhang would very much increase Kabayel's chances against Usyk on paper. In that video, I was also bigging up Kabayel's pure persistence in his relentless assaults to the body, and how he is willing to take shots from big punchers to make the investment to the body. And this may pay off against Usyk, because both AJ and Fury seem to be in a rush to let off body shots on Usyk due to a counter threat. But Kabayel just goes all in on the body, so we could see him do the same against Usyk and be successful in that. And when Zhang vs Kabayel took place, look what happened. Kabayel put on a relentless body shot onslaught to become the first man to stop Zhilei Zhang, and he survived a knockdown to do so, solidifying what I said about him taking that high risk approach in order to prioritise his investments to the body. So that's 3 massive wins in a row for Agit Kabayel, all by body shot stoppages. But my answer on who is most likely to defeat Alexander Usyk depended on another fight that was set to happen that night, in Daniel Dubois vs Joseph Parker. So I can't just keep Kabayel as the frontrunner to beat Usyk just for his win over Zhang. And I did say that the winner of the Zhang vs Kabayel fight would only be my frontrunner to beat Usyk if neither Daniel Dubois nor Joseph Parker came off looking too great as a result of their fight. But obviously, the Dubois vs Parker fight didn't happen. and for that reason, I'll try to keep it brief in what I was saying for that one. So I actually picked Joseph Parker to defeat Daniel Dubois, but because styles make fights, I still gave Dubois more of a chance against Usyk than I did Parker. Parker played the role of boxer in his wins over Deontay Wilder and Zhilei Zhang, his last 2 fights at that point, but Usyk is the better boxer than Parker, so I couldn't see what Parker could really do in a fight against Usyk. And as for Dubois, I said that Usyk would completely outbox him again like he did in their first fight. But as for what Daniel Dubois and Joseph Parker's fight against each other could do for their chances against Alexander Usyk, I said that however Parker beats Dubois, he would then be on a mad winning streak, so it increases his chances against Usyk on paper, but technically and tactically, he can't really do anything in outboxing Dubois to prove that he'd be able to outbox Usyk. And as for Dubois, I said that if he just rushed Parker and stopped him in the first half of the fight, and Parker looked like he couldn't put up much of a fight, it would not increase his chances of being able to defeat Usyk in a rematch at all. But if Parker was really on his game and was outboxing Dubois in there, but Dubois then started to figure Parker out and managed to stop him in the second half of the fight, then his chances against Usyk would go up greatly in my books, and then I'd have Dubois as my front runner to beat Usyk regardless of how the Zhang vs Kabayel fight went. But Dubois fell ill, and Parker of course fought Bakole on late notice instead, and stopped him in round 2. So I did address Martin Bakole's chances of defeating Alexander Usyk in that old video of mine, and I gave Bakole no chance at all of beating Usyk. Now, I wasn't passing that off as some hot take because I know most people would pick Usyk to beat Bakole anyway, but I was saying that most people would probably pick Usyk by points. But I said that Usyk would stop Bakole around the middle rounds and the fight wouldn't even be close, and that was before Bakole just got stopped on the weekend. And just to pause here to address Bakole, some people weren't very happy with my take, but I'm not going to get all sassy here and start calling them Bakole fanboys. Nah. If you pick Bakole to beat Usyk then, fair play, but I personally just don't give Bakole any chance against Usyk at all. But that doesn't mean I dislike Bakole. I think Bakole is a solid heavyweight, but he is very overrated, and being overrated doesn't mean you're not good, it just means that people rate you higher than they probably should for the most part. I do think that there are a lot of winnable fights up the rankings out there for Bakole, and there is a route to the world heavyweight title for him depending on what happens with the belts. But there are also a few other top guys up the rankings that I'd pick to beat Bakole, and seeing as Usyk is the number 1 guy at heavyweight by a good bit, I therefore just think that Usyk absolutely batters Bakole. No hate involved there, just realistic. Look, there are talks that Bakole's scheduled fight with Efe Ajagba may no longer be an IBF eliminator, because Bakole challenged for the WBO interim title against Parker. But I hope that fight with Ajagba is an IBF eliminator. That would kind of mean that in terms of rankings, Bakole's loss to Parker didn't really mean much. It was just a quick fight in the meantime that got him a huge payday, and nobody looks down on him for the loss due to how late notice it was, and he is therefore not held back any further in his world title pursuit after the loss, and just goes on as normal after that quick cash grab. And if things can go like that for Bakole, then I'll be very happy for him. Like, how cool would that be? But seeing as I would have picked Joseph Parker to beat Bakole anyway, even if Bakole did have a full camp, I hate to say it because Parker could only beat the man in front of him, but that fight against an unfit Martin Bakole does nothing for me in terms of Parker's chances of being able to defeat Usyk. Remember I said in my who is most likely to defeat Alexander Usyk video that if the winner of Kabayel Zhang wins in emphatic fashion and nobody comes off looking too good in the Parker Dubois fight, then I'd tip the winner of Kabayel Zhang as the front runner to beat Usyk. And guess what? Kabayel did look great coming off of his win over Zhang, and Joseph Parker and Daniel Dubois didn't even end up fighting each other. So much like I originally tipped Agit Kabayel as the front runner to beat Alexander Usyk, after that last crescendo card, Kabayel is still the front runner to beat Usyk in my books. But in terms of who is most deserving to challenge for Alexander Usyk's unified heavyweight titles, let me not beat around the bush. As the title and thumbnail of this video likely reveals, that man is Joseph Parker. Now, I'm not saying that Parker has been deserving a shot against Usyk since his last fight against Zhilei Zhang or anything like that. No, it's only due to the events that expired last week that Parker is currently by far the most deserving fighter to get a shot at Usyk, without a doubt. Yes, the way everything went down, it is valid to have that volatile switch up in opinion. Well, it's not even really a switch up because I never even said who is most deserving of getting a shot at Alexander Usyk since he beat Fury in that rematch back in December anyway. Okay, but let's say I told you at the start of fight week that Parker is not going to beat Daniel Dubois, but he will end up being the man most deserving to get the Usyk fight. You would be very confused, but ultimately, Parker did not beat Dubois because he didn't fight him, because Dubois pulled out. So that very scenario of Parker not beating Dubois, but ending up as the man most deserving for a shot at Usyk, has come to fruition. So let's address the IBF heavyweight champion of the world, Daniel Dubois, first and foremost. So there are a lot of conspiracy theories going around about Daniel Dubois faking illness to pull out of the Parker fight for two main reasons. either because he didn't fancy the Parker fight and he was scared to lose his belt, so he wanted to hold out for the Usyk rematch, the undisputed fight he was calling for even with his fight with Parker being scheduled. And the other theory suggests that Daniel Dubois has failed a drugs test, so the illness was a cover-up for that. Whether he failed a private test and his own team pulled him out, or if he actually officially popped for PEDs and the powers that be in boxing are covering it up for him. Because of course, he would not only be forced out of the Parker fight and have his IBF belt stripped from him if he failed a drugs test, but this would retroactively invalidate the run he's been on since his loss to Usyk, including that massive win over Anthony Joshua. And this would actually reinforce pre-existing theories that Dubois is in fact a drugs cheat. Now, although I believe that both of those theories may very well be true, I don't even need to get into either of them, for the fact that even if Dubois was genuinely too ill to fight Joseph Parker, even by doctor's orders, what I am about to say will ring true anyway. Another thing here, some people would say that even if Dubois was truly ill, he should have been stripped of the IBF belt anyway, because it's not Parker's fault that Dubois got ill, so Parker should have kept his title shot. You know, Dubois was not fit to defend his belt, and although that is also a very valid point, I don't even need to go there either. Now, the thing that has gotten to me and has urged me to clamour for Joseph Parker to get the Usyk fight next is that Frank Warren, Daniel Dubois' promoter of course, and others who are to be involved in an Usyk-Dubois rematch, even including Usyk himself, are now talking like Usyk-Dubois is automatically the fight to make next. And this was before the Parker vs Bakole fight even happened, or even got made I think. I think this talk was starting right at the point of Dubois allegedly falling sick, and the rumours started that he might pull out of the Parker fight on the Thursday of fight week. So yes, Daniel Dubois vs Alexander Usyk 2 would be for undisputed, but Parker could have easily picked up that IBF belt if he was given the chance to fight Dubois, but again, he was deprived of his IBF title shot because Dubois pulled out. So how does Dubois then get this big Usyk fight, after leaving Joseph Parker without an opponent and having to fight Bakole on 2 days notice? It's mind-boggling to me that people are talking like Usyk vs Dubois 2 ought to be next. So cool, on one hand, you've got Daniel Dubois. You could argue that his last 3 wins warrant an undisputed title fight, but forget about that. He's off the back of pulling out of a fight on 2 days notice and messing everything up. Then you've got Parker, who has never got the chance to fight Usyk before, and he is on a 6-fight win streak, with the last 3 wins coming against Deontay Wilder, Zhilei Zhang, and Martin Bakole. So again, even if Dubois is really ill, because Parker is the one who pulled through like that, his next fight really ought to be a title shot. But if Usyk and Dubois fought next, there'll be no belt for Parker to fight for of course. So then you could say, let's remake Daniel Dubois vs Joseph Parker again. But no one seems to be interested in that. Definitely not Dubois and his team. So fine, if Dubois vs Parker really can't be remade, let Parker fight Usyk next instead of Dubois then. But if Dubois does fight Parker next, then who is Usyk meant to fight? That's why I'm all for Joseph Parker vs Alexander Usyk next up. Then Daniel Dubois can go and defend that IBF belt he's managed to keep a hold of against Agit Kabayel maybe. So all that I just said is coming from an innocent perspective, giving Dubois the benefit of the doubt that he is actually sick. But let's be honest, this whole situation is very fishy. And as aforementioned, there is a good bit of credence to the conspiracy theories regarding this fight's cancellation. And it is really just shameless from Frank Warren to be talking about Usyk Dubois right after Dubois pulled out of the Parker fight. Give the situation time to breathe at least, because again, if Dubois really is sick, his promoter calling for the Usyk fight without hesitation right away, without even considering discussing Dubois vs Parker potentially being remade, it is really going to add fuel to the fire that is all of these conspiracy theories going around. Not a good look at all. But Daniel Dubois himself, he's been in hiding. I'm sure his team have advised him to do so, and that's probably for the best. If he's going around making public appearances, then people will question how sick he really was. But with a lack of even a PR post in his social media about his illness like some doctor's note or something, people will find his alleged illness very suspect, and the longer he is in hiding, the more the theories will continue to brew and brew. Because us boxing fans, most of us have no lives, so we will sit here for days and then trying to make a case that Dubois has failed a drug test or something of the likes. So I've made it clear that I don't think Daniel Dubois deserves the Usyk rematch next. He can go and defend that IBF belt that he's lucky to keep a hold of. And notice, I didn't even say that he should be stripped of the IBF title, just in case any of you guys think I'm really hating on Dubois here or something. Then if Dubois defends that belt successfully, he can go and fight the winner of Usyk vs Parker. Well, that's the way I want it. Now, I say Frank Warren is shameless in his calling for the Usyk Dubois rematch, but I can't quite say the same about Dubois himself yet, again due to his lack of public appearance since the pullout. But much like Dubois showed that he was way more interested in the potential Usyk rematch than the fight he actually had scheduled with Joseph Parker, that didn't even end up happening, when he got in the ring to confront Usyk after Usyk's second victory over Tyson Fury, I will make the educated guess that Dubois will shamelessly start calling for the Usyk fight in his next public appearance after conveniently pulling out of the Parker fight and keeping his belt. And in anticipation of that, I would have to compare Daniel Dubois to one Tommy Fury. Now some of you guys might remember that I made a video called How Regarded is Tommy Fury Actually, in reaction to his pullout of the Darren Till fight and his very flawed justification of that pullout. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. And where this Tommy Fury Darren Till situation links to what I am talking about now with Dubois, is that straight after Tommy Fury gave his rubbish excuse of why he wasn't going to fight Till, he immediately took to social media to shamelessly call out Jake Paul, making it so obvious that he pulled out of the Till fight because he didn't fancy it, and immediately called out Jake Paul for a rematch to try and get a bigger payday. And his pullout of the Darren Till fight left that Misfits card in jeopardy, a card that he was main eventing in his hometown, and I'm sure a lot of his fans already bought tickets for that fight. Ridiculous. But to be fair, Anthony Taylor stepped in as Tommy Fury's replacement, and Darren Till vs Anthony Taylor actually ended up being a pretty decent fight. So funnily enough, Anthony Taylor wound up being a more formidable replacement opponent than Martin Bakole did, but I know that's a completely different situation. Also, by the way, I don't really watch Misfits, but I was really interested in seeing Darren Till in the boxing ring, so I had to catch that main event live. So yeah, Dubois calling for the Usyk rematch right after pulling out of the Parker fight would be just like Tommy Fury calling for the Jake Paul rematch right after pulling out of the Darren Till fight. Plus, Daniel Dubois and Tommy Fury is a valid comparison to make all round, because both men are highly regarded. But the difference is that Tommy Fury's pullout of the Darren Till fight has probably blacklisted him from Misfits cards, and I'm sure Jake Paul's promotion won't want to platform him either. But Daniel Dubois has the backing of Frank Warren behind him, and we've seen already that Bricktop will push for that Usyk Dubois rematch no matter what. And lastly, before I move on from this Dubois pullout stuff, seeing as I've already compared this to a Misfits fight cancellation, I might as well compare it to another affair that happened lately that wasn't even in boxing, and that was Arman Tsarukyan's pulling out of his fight with Islam Makhachev due to a back injury just a day before. Tsarukyan was supposed to be challenging Makhachev for Makhachev's undisputed UFC lightweight title, but because he pulled out, regardless of the legitimacy of the injury, Dana White has moved Tsarukyan back down the totem pole, and Tsarukyan will now have to earn number one contendership again in the cage, rightly so. That situation is pretty different because Dubois pulled out of a defense for his one belt and will now be rewarded for a shot at undisputed with the other 3 belts on the line. So Arman Tsarukyan was rightfully punished in a sense for his pullout, but the Dubois situation is even worse, and he's going to get away with it, ain't he? Because people are really talking like the Usyk fight is next for Dubois. But to finally move on from the Dubois pullout, let's now ask ourselves, has Joseph Parker had the toughest route back to a world title shot in heavyweight history since he lost his WBO world title to Anthony Joshua back in 2018? It's more common to talk about fighters having a tough route just to a world title in general, but usually a former world champ or even just a former world title challenger will find their way back to a world title fight sooner rather than later if they have been fighting at a decent level. So here is Parker's resume since that loss to AJ in 2018. And look, I know he took a second consecutive loss after the AJ fight to Dillian Whyte, went on a fairly mediocre 6-fight winning streak, got battered by Joe Joyce to take his 3rd career loss, got 3 low-level wins, then he got his break in Riyadh season and got back-to-back wins over Deontay Wilder and Zhilei Zhang, which did actually line him up for a world title shot, but Dubois fell ill and pulled out, and then he fought on Martin Bakole coming in on 2 days notice. But let me break that all down, because in boxing, take any fighter on earth in history and you could say some stuff to absolutely rubbish off their resume. So all we can do is compare it to other fighters. So Parker's 6 wins after the back-to-back losses against AJ and Whyte. Great wins? No. But can a former world champ get a world title shot off of a lesser win streak than that? Yes. Well, look to AJ's 4-fight win streak after the back-to-back losses to Usyk that got him his shot at Daniel Dubois' IBF title, and I'm sure there's much worse examples out there. But after those 6 wins, Parker happened to lose to an undefeated Joe Joyce in an absolute war, a result which you could say aged badly. But why? Because Joyce went on to lose twice in a row after the fact? But those losses were to Zhilei Zhang, and Parker went on to beat Zhang himself, so that cancels out the talks of Parker's loss to Joyce aging badly. That was a prime Joe Joyce in there who handed that devastating defeat to Joseph Parker, but Parker picked himself back up and got another win streak going after that. And I'm not saying all this to say that Parker has been robbed of opportunities or anything like that, or crying and complaining that others have gotten back to a title shot through easier routes. Like AJ, for example, the man I just compared him to. AJ carries a bigger name and he is a former unified world champ with more title wins in his record. So again, I'm not here to argue that Parker has been deprived of a shot back at the world title due to unfair politics or anything, but the way things have played out, the fights that he just happened to have, just gives him one of the best resumes on paper for a former world champion yet to get a crack back at the belt again. And I know there was a loss in there, but that's why I'm saying he's had the toughest route. He had to pick himself back up from a defeat that came off the back of a win streak that would have earned other fighters a world title shot. And the recent win over Martin Bakole just galvanizes all that I am saying here, which is why I'm jumping on this thing now. Yes, it is totally fair that it took wins over both Deontay Wilder and Zhang for Parker to finally get a shot back at the title. But that world title fight just so happened to be cancelled, and he had to fight Bakole instead, and won. So I'm not rewriting history here saying, oh, Parker had to beat Wilder, Zhang and Bakole just to get a world title shot. No, but at the end of the day, those are the fights that actually took place. He did not fight for a world title in any of those fights. So going off of record alone, we can use this argument to say that Joseph Parker has had the toughest route back to a world title. But seeing as I'm getting on long already, I'm not actually going to compare Parker's post-world championship record to other fighters throughout history right now. That could be a discussion for another day. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any other heavyweight who has lost their world title and been on a run, or runs like Parker, before fighting for a belt again. But the damning thing is, Parker may not even get a crack at the world title next. If Usyk vs Buatsi indeed happens next, people are saying that Joseph Parker vs Agit Kabayel could happen next. And if Parker beat Kabayel as well before getting a world title shot, I wouldn't even need to do no comparing. He surely would have easily had the toughest route ever back to a world heavyweight title shot then. Now, I mentioned at the start of this discussion that typically one would talk about someone having the longest route to their first world title shot. And back in December, after Dillian Whyte defeated Ebenezer Tete, I did a news video which most of you wouldn't have seen, barely got any views, but I spoke about how I wanted to make a video about Dillian Whyte's resume. Now in my head, I was pondering hard about how I would go about making such a video, and then I thought, shall I take a look at whether Dillian Whyte has the best resume before fighting for a world heavyweight title in history? So I was therefore sat there for days on end, thinking and researching what other heavyweights had put together great resumes before their first time challenging for a world title. And I was going too far in the past, thinking of fighters of old like Riddick Bowe and that. But then after a while, I was like, wait, Joe Joyce? And he still ain't even ever fought for a world title, and probably never will. So then after weeks and weeks of planning in my head how I would make a video comparing Dillian Whyte's resume to that of Joe Joyce and other heavyweights, what do you know? Dillian Whyte versus Joe Joyce gets made. So I was like, cool, I might as well just wait for that fight to conclude before I have this discussion. But now with this stuff I'm saying about Parker here, I might have to throw in that conversation of the longest road back to a world heavyweight title too. So yeah, comparing all of that stuff will be a very fun one. But there's a lot of other videos that I'm trying to work on within the next couple of months, so I probably won't even start working on that video after the Whyte versus Joyce fight. I'll have to put that one on the back burner for a few months, I ain't gonna lie.
Just to pause here, speaking of Joe Joyce versus Dillian Whyte, that fight is scheduled to take place on April 5th, but it turns out Joe Joyce is fighting tomorrow night, March the 1st, against Patrick Corte, who I was about to say is coming off of a loss to Hughie Fury, but he actually is coming off of a win over Pavel Sawa since that Hughie Fury fight. So yeah, Joyce versus Corte. When I saw this one on the schedule for March 1st, I got a bit shook. I was like, is the fight with Dillian Whyte cancelled? What's this? But no, he's got two fights scheduled within just over a month of each other, so bit high risk for Joe Joyce. You know, you never know with Joyce these days. No fight is a guaranteed win for him. So this is like a tune-up fight for the Dillian Whyte fight. But what if he gets chinned by Patrick Corte and gets hit with a medical suspension? What does that mean? Patrick Corte steals a Dillian Whyte fight? Or, I don't know, maybe that card can shuffle around and Dillian Whyte could actually fight Lawrence Okoli and then maybe do Patrick Corte versus Rakpo. I don't know. But yeah, I'm surprised to see that Joe Joyce has got two fights scheduled within such short succession. But yeah, we'll see. I will be watching Joe Joyce versus Patrick Corte tomorrow night then, I guess, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. Should be an easy one for Joe Joyce, but again, we never know.
But ultimately, yes, I do think Joseph Parker is the most deserving of the shot at Alexander Usyk's unified crown. But I do have Agit Kabayel as the guy who would most likely be able to defeat Alexander Usyk if he were to get in the ring with him. I'd still pick Usyk to beat Kabayel, of course, but I give Kabayel more of a chance against Usyk than I do with any other boxer on the planet. Which sounds wild to say, but again, do go back and watch my who is most likely to defeat Alexander Usyk video for more analysis on that. And fast forward to the potential mandatories and unifications timestamp. And do bear in mind that was before Kabayel even beat Zhilei Zhang. And I must note on Kabayel, I know that he does leave himself open for shots. And in his last fight before this 3-fight Riyadh season win streak, he got rocked badly by a not so stellar opponent in Argon Smakisi. So it should be easy pickings for Usyk then. but Kabayel has shown that he can take shots or recover from shots well when he does get caught to the chin when throwing them 3, 4, 5 punch combos to the body. And other than being knocked down by Zhang and caught a couple of times by an already faded Makhmudov, Kabayel has been on his game for the most part since the Skumakisi fight. Look, when it comes to who can beat Usyk, we're always talking about a puncher's chance, and even if Kabayel does have to take shots to the chin to land to Usyk's body, Kabayel's puncher's chance is unique to everyone else's puncher's chance in that it is a puncher's chance to the body, so that's a good enough reason for me to have him as the front runner to beat Usyk. So before I close out, I do want to acknowledge that Junto Nakatani fight that happened on the Monday after the Beterbiev vs Bivol 2 weekend. Always nice to have a big Japanese fight early in the week right after a great weekend of boxing. Now I'll be honest, I didn't catch this one live and I already knew the result when watching the full fight back, but it didn't look like Nakatani was en route to a stoppage at all in the fight. By the end of the third, he just quickly hurt the guy to the body out of nowhere, then just blitzed him with a combo to put him down. Then he knocked the guy down again right after for the stoppage win to defend his WBC bantamweight strap. Now the bantamweight division has got 4 different Japanese world champions, and it looks like Nakatani will be unifying against the IBF champion Ryosuke Nishida next up, which is cool. I'll look to watch that fight when it happens, but it will probably be a dominant win for Nakatani, and the vacant Ring Magazine belt should be on the line for that one. Alright, so let me know what you guys thought of that Beterbiev vs Bivol 2 card, or the last crescendo card shall I say, and let me know what you think should happen next in the heavyweight division. Should Joseph Parker get the Alexander Usyk fight next with Dubois defending his IBF belt in another fight? Winner of Bakole vs Jagba maybe? Or an AJ rematch? Or should Daniel Dubois actually get the Usyk fight next for Undisputed and Parker can go and fight Kabayel when he gets the Undisputed title shot? Or should Parker vs Dubois get remade next, leaving Usyk to defend his unified titles against the new WBC interim champion in Agit Kabayel? But the fundamental question is, could Kabayel be as effective with the body shots against Usyk like he was his last 3 opponents? And he will be, even more so, but until that fight happens, it's going to be hard to verify that I think he'll be as effective. So let me know what you think about all that in the comments, and you have been listening to O.M.E. Boxing.